welcome everybody. Welcome to another episode of BIM After Dark Live. My name is Jeff, also known as the Revit Kid. Thank you for joining me today. I have an awesome guest and we're going to be talking about awesome stuff, site modeling and landscape modeling for architecture from the eyes of someone experienced in landscape architecture, which I think is pretty neat and probably something that I know a lot of you may not be experienced in. So always great to hear from people using Revit differently than I'm used to hearing it. So I'm super excited. Stick around. She's also going to be showing a tool that has been developed for this by her and her team, and you don't want to miss that, especially if you've ever tried using the site tool that the site add-in that came with Revit and Autodesk. Then you're gonna want to see this, because I could tell you it's a little bit better. So thank you guys for joining me again. This is live. It's a new time today, so I have a bottle of water instead of a glass of wine, but that's okay because it's the middle of the day and we might have some different guests or some different viewers, which is pretty awesome. Before I introduce our guest, I did want to remind you guys that we are live and feel free to chat. I'll be checking it out the whole time through. And I also want to introduce you guys to the new title sponsor of this show. So as you know, in the past, I had a couple different title sponsors. I'm really excited about this one because it's a company and a product that I think many of you may not have heard of, but will also find a ton of value in. So let me roll the reel and then we'll talk a little bit about it. So you guys hopefully saw that reel, but the new title sponsor of this show is Polycam. Anyone who doesn't know what Polycam is, it is actually an app for iPhones and iPads. The way I got sort of introduced to it is I bought this iPhone a couple of years ago, and it was the first one I ever had that had LiDAR. You guys are probably familiar with what LiDAR is. And so I needed an application to try out my LiDAR. I was, pretty excited to have LiDAR and try it out. And so the first one that came up when I searched was actually Polycam. And fast forward 2 years down the road, I've tested it out. I've done all kinds of cool stuff, and I reached out to the company, and they're awesome. And they've also been asking for feedback on how to get these scans into Revit. And so what you'll see is it is a application where you can do LiDAR scanning as well as photogrammetry directly from your iPad or your phone, and it exports into lots of different formats. What type of formats? Well, point clouds with RGBs. You saw that video there. Meshes like OBJ, STL, and you name it, FBX, and it goes through it. So as you guys know, the newer version of Revit allows you to bring in OBJ with textures. However, previous versions let you bring in point clouds with RGB. And so I will tell you, it's a phenomenal application, super easy to use. You can use it for free. Sign up and roll through it. There's a link I mentioned before, polycam.bimafterdark.com. There was also a QR code. If you missed it, go back and scan it from your device. But Polycam, thank you for supporting us, and I'm super excited to let you guys know in the audience more about it in the future and some of the cool things you can do with it. Okay, so now let's bring in our guest. Lauren, I'm so sorry that you had to wait so long and stare at just me doing all that. You didn't get to see the hype video and the music and everything I had playing there because it was pretty cool. So you have to check it out afterwards. I want to welcome to the show Lauren Schmidt. How are you doing, Lauren?
Hey, doing good.
All right. Thank you for joining me today. I'm super excited about this. I've as we talked about before earlier, and I think you've probably seen a couple of my previous episodes, I do end up doing a lot of site modeling and topography modeling and stuff like that in Revit, but usually it's for the sake of visualizations and not necessarily with an end game in mind of being useful. And so I'm always excited when folks are trying to do the opposite, which is not only just model, but also make models that are useful for their profession. And so before we jump into all of that, I think this is the first time on the show, so I think you should probably introduce yourself to the BIM After Dark audience. So, Lauren, who are you? What do you do?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Lauren Schmidt. I am a a landscape architect. So been in practice for going on almost 10 years now. So I do work at, I think you mentioned on Twitter, I work with Aaron Maller at Parallax Team. So we're
Yep.
the Revit
Yeah, and you know,
Revit
when we set this
BIM
up,
consultancy.
I was looking back and I didn't even realize that I did back-to-back Parallax. I usually like to put someone in between Parallax, but that's okay. We did back-to-back Parallax, and I should have just brought John and Melissa and everyone in on the next week and just had a whole month of Parallax. But no, no, that's awesome. So yes, you do work with Parallax Team. If you guys missed the episode last week, check it out. Aaron came on for the like fourth or fifth time, and we talked about groups versus links, and it was super fun. So awesome. I guess before we jump into the actual landscape and all that good stuff, I'm curious what drove you before joining Parallax to thinking Revit was a useful tool for landscape architecture, because usually people just wipe it away and don't even
Right,
bother. So what was the
right,
driving
right.
force for you?
Um, wait, yeah. So I guess right out of school, I ended up at an architecture engineering firm in Indianapolis, where their architecture side had been using Revit for like 5 or 6 years. And this was almost 10 years ago now. So they'd
Hmm.
been using it for a while. And they had like a small site landscape group, which I was a part of. And they kind of had everyone else in Revit already. So they had interiors in Revit, they had their
Hmm.
MEP in Revit. Um, they worked closely with like a structural. It was almost like it was in-house, but it wasn't, and they were all in Revit too. And so it was basically just like landscape and civil was not in Revit, and
Hmm.
so they were interested in kind of getting that started. And I was interested also kind of, I don't know, certain people I think are more in, I find Revit a little bit easier maybe to learn than others, and I definitely like my personality type is one that, yeah, I took pretty quickly to it, and I was able to kind of lean on the architecture team,
Hmm.
and their knowledge to kind of learn from them. But a lot of it was kind of self-taught, and so that's when I started my blog, Land Dark BIM, because there wasn't really any resources out there for landscape architects wanting
Hmm.
to learn how to use Revit. Um, I knew there was other people out there doing it, but there's just like there was no resources. Um, so
Yeah.
that's kind of how I got my start.
Awesome. Yeah, I should have mentioned that as well. So Lauren runs a blog called Land Arc BIM, and I'll put the links to that in the description as well as on the blog post tomorrow. But yeah. So as far as so I guess you didn't have to convince necessarily the firm you work for at the time, but I have to imagine that there was a lot of frustration in trying to get what you needed done out of Revit. But clearly you had the personality where you wanted to try and figure it out, right? But I have to imagine that was challenging. Was that challenging?
Yeah, it was. I think it's one of those things where when you first start down something like that, like you don't know what you don't know.
Mm.
And so like that was probably a little bit to my advantage that like yeah. And like I was also in the Midwest working on relatively simple sites, and
Mm.
so that probably also helped a little bit.
Relatively
So like
flat sites is.
yeah, relatively like
Yeah, yeah.
Indiana is pretty flat.
Yeah, yeah.
So like, but yeah, so I started probably like with baby steps, but have gotten and worked on, yeah, a lot much more complex sites. Yeah, a couple of like, so after we actually moved abroad for a couple of years, and so
Mm.
I got really into Dynamo.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'll see that on my blog during that time period. Yeah, I got, so Dynamo was kind of like my first taste of like the Revit API and like understanding what Revit can actually do on the back end, which it can
Mm.
do quite a bit.
Right.
Um,
Overcoming those limitations you were feeling on the front end.
right. And so, yeah, Dynamo was kind of my, yeah, a big step towards like getting landscape a little bit more figured out, but
Hmm.
still very, very limited.
Awesome. So today I think the goal here was to sort of run through some out of the box tips and tricks that you've sort of developed over time for anyone, whether you're an architect or a landscape architect or anyone who has to sort of deal with the site tools in Revit, or I mean, I would say the site tools and adjacent tools in Revit, and then as well as talk about FOREground, which is the application that you guys developed to overcome some of these limitations. So I'm excited for that. Everyone stick around for a minute. What we are going to do is we actually are going to take a quick break, and we are going to do the tip of the week. For those of you who have been following along with the show, you're probably familiar with this segment, but basically we're going to take a quick break from the topic, and we are going to go to the Big Bad BIM tip of the week, which is sponsored by Enscape. I'm sure a lot of you guys know Enscape and following along with this show here, but Enscape is a real-time rendering program and add-in to Revit that is phenomenal, super easy to use. If you watched 3 or 4 episodes ago, I'll put a link in there. We ran through some of the new versions of Enscape and so on. So head on over to enscape.bimafterdark.com. Sign up for a free trial, or I believe you can get 10% off discount by using that. So the tip of the week this week is actually from Tim is the user, and I believe that the tip came from Dan Stein, because I think I remember seeing him post about it. But it's a super easy, super quick tip that I think a lot of people. I actually showed someone else this week, and lower that volume a little bit there. And I thought it was so useful that I'd share it here. So what I have here is a MEP model. This is a plumbing model, and I'm going to bring in a link. So I'm going to just load in a ductwork link and hope that nothing blows up. I probably should use the smaller model. So I'm going to bring in the ductwork link, and what this tip is how you can copy and paste elements from a link to your current model. Okay, so here's my ductwork link. If I zoom into the corner here, and I tab, and I'm just going to select. So all these ductwork, this is in my link. So I'm just going to quickly tab, and select all this ductwork. And if I go up to the top, notice I can actually use copy. I can use control copy. If I click control copy and I go down to paste, I can paste a line to same place. And guess what happens? It's actually pasting those elements. It's going to give me some warnings based on, or not some warnings, some of them are updates or what they're going to take properties from the current file. I'm going to click OK. And then I'm going to turn off our link, and then you'll see that our elements have been copied and pasted from the link into the current file. Super useful tool that hopefully you don't have to use too often, but I think it's a tip that some of you guys can probably gain some value out of. So let me just turn off the link so you can see what happened there. So there we go there. Now these ducts, or fabrication ducts in this case, these are actually in my local file. So Tim, thank you so much for the tip. I appreciate it. Let me jump back to my face here so everyone can see me instead of the duct, and Lauren as well. All right, so thank you for the tip. If you guys have a tip, feel free to email me. If I choose it, I will be sending you a free t-shirt. So that was our little tip of the week break. Thanks for sending it in, Tip, and I hope that that added some value to your lives. I know I showed someone this week and they were like, face palm, pretty cool. Okay, so Lauren, now you're back. I know you didn't get to see any of that, but hopefully you heard it and were like, this is what Jeff's doing. Pretty cool tip. I don't know if you knew that, but I remember when I learned it a year or two ago. I thought it was pretty wild, and I thought it was like, can I always do this? And so I happened to be in a 2018 file last week, and I tried it out, and it does work, which is pretty cool. So apparently we could always do that, which is pretty neat. Alrighty. So, Lauren, let's do this. So, ran through a little bit of your history, how you got to where you are. So, I think it's just time to jump into some demo and let's talk about some cool stuff. I'm sure we're going to have some questions. Remember, guys, you are in chat. So, I'm sure we're going to have some questions. So, feel free. I'm sure you've got some stuff teed up and hopefully they take us in all sort of directions. But what's the first thing you want to show us today, Lauren?
Sure. So I guess, is my screen being shared then,
Yep.
Jeff?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So I was just going to talk through, some of the kind of common landscape workflows, and then we can kind of touch on foreground a little bit, but yeah, essentially, and this is always kind of a question that we kind of bring up and discuss is kind of talking through what do you build a site out of? Like, you get people talking about topography like yourself, but often we're building sites and landscapes are built out of essentially shape edited floors or slabs. And so kind of the old school method that that you do is basically you can have these floors and then you just have to shape edit them manually,
Hmm.
which is how I started out doing it. Like it works. It's just like it's kind of super slow and can be super painful.
Hmm.
Um, but essentially, yeah, you go into modify sub elements. You can like grab them all to like speed things up. If you see if I know what I'm working at, this will be a good test. Yeah, and I can like set the elevation of those, and they're there somewhere. Yeah, up there somewhere. But yeah, it's just you can see it's just a super tedious process.
Hmm.
And that's something that I learned how to you can augment that a little bit with Dynamo,
Hmm.
and you can start to automate that. And then the awesome thing kind of about like Revit and the back end of the API is like topography and floors can interact. Like they basically both have points and they can like you can pull points between them. So you can do
Hmm.
that with Dynamo or you can do that with an add-in. So that's one of like the big things that we're doing with FOREground. Just as an example, um, drape slabs is kind of like one of our big tools
Hmm.
where you can basically just pick a whole bunch of slabs and then it's going to sit here and think about it. It's going to try to find a host. You can see it grabs that topography there.
Hmm.
Um, and then it's going to basically just start calculating what needs to happen to bring those floors up to that topography.
Hmm.
So we have some different like interior, exterior point methods. So it lets you can kind of control how many points you put in. Uh, but I'll just go ahead and run this really quick. Um, It'll take a second because I have 8 slabs selected, but then it's just going to bring them up to that topography basically. And the
Hmm.
method I chose was basically looking for kind of all the minimum boundary points and then also adding like points along the contours as
Hmm.
well. Um,
That's awesome. Yeah. So yeah. So the process that Lauren's talking about there is, without using this add-in, you would be manually placing and modifying these points of the slab to adjust to topography. And I'm sure anyone out there who's done that process knows how lovely and fun it is, because I know I've done it
right.
before. And actually, probably one of the worst things about that process is when things change, because it can be, it can be a nightmare sometimes to re-update, especially if you have multiple things aligning at the same plane. So
Yeah.
that's super helpful.
Yeah, and you can still go in and then modify things manually after the fact,
Hmm.
but it helps you kind of
So was
initially
that was
without
that
a
adding
big
sub
lift.
elements too, based on the add-in as needed?
Yeah, it you can do it so it doesn't add any points,
Hmm.
but depending on like what your topography shape is, so you can see like here, even like on areas where I didn't
Yeah.
add as many points, like the topography is kind of like bleeding through a little bit.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, So yeah, you could kind of fix that with shape topo, which is sort of like the inverse of drape in a lot of ways,
Hmm.
but it essentially lets you like align a topography to the underside. You can also like change the offset. So I can go ahead and grab a few of these guys. Um, and then it's going to do kind of similar but reverse.
Hmm.
And it's going to push those points back into the topography so that it follows it
Hmm.
effectively. Um, and in general, like my approach with topography is that it because of the way topography works in Revit, it's a very limited documentation tool. Like you can't topography doesn't have any sort of like hatch pattern and plan.
Hmm.
Like it's a mesh. It has so many limitations that we generally, in my experience and how we're treating in FOREground is we treat it as this like kind of big host
Hmm.
like visual element tool, but like not like super useful for documentation. So a lot of our tools for grading are
Hmm.
much more focused around like slabs and
So I mean that's interesting. So before foreground, before add-ins, let's say, or before any of that,
mhm.
were you treating topo the same way, where it was sort of the blanket of, let's say, grass or dirt, whatever, and then you're kind of hosting above and below, and that's how you were building your site plans, or were you working with sub regions and the topography environment to try and make these things work?
Yeah, I mean, subregions, I just never use those anymore, just because
Because you get
like
nothing but errors when you try and use them.
right. Well, they're like topography but more useless,
Yeah.
I would say,
It's
because
either
like they
errors or
can't
you just get missing pieces of mesh that you don't
right,
understand
like they
why.
can't
Yeah.
yeah, they can't share edges. And this
Mhm.
is like yeah, they're like super useless in doc. Like if you're just visualizing, like I can understand how people throw them in really quick because
Mhm.
like yeah, it follows the topography perfectly, and if you just need like a material
Mhm.
for a path or a road, like that's great. But
Right.
when you're actually making documentation, like what I do in Revit, yeah, like there's no hatch patterns and no
Mhm.
edges, and like that just immediately falls apart,
Yep.
and so it doesn't really work.
Mhm.
Um,
What about if the host is changing? So if you're showing an existing or existing a new grading plan or something like that, it does how are you interacting with, let's say, floors and, or I shouldn't say, streets and sidewalks with the topography in that form? You're still just using the topography as the visualization of those changes, but still managing the other stuff on top of it.
Yeah, I think it depends on the project. Like on a site like this where you have like a big kind of sprawling site and
Mm-hmm.
like not like the topography is more useful as a visualization tool. But I've worked on like a number of like very urban sites
Mm-hmm.
where essentially like you might start with the topography as like a big base element to build up, but then you fill in your sidewalks and roads and then like suddenly it's all floors. Like
Mm-hmm.
even your planters are floors. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that's like just much more useful because those are all solids with thicknesses that you
Mm-hmm.
can define. And so that's often the route you'll see on urban sites where you have like your building is so much of your footprint and
Mm-hmm.
it's just like sidewalks and like that interstitial space that's like almost all hardscape anyway.
Right.
Um, so like you're not even using topography
Mm-hmm.
on those sorts of projects,
Got it.
really.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's we we have plenty of sites where it's like, it's like a 5 or 10 foot change between, like, 400 or 500 feet. Like, that's flat. That's flat. Sorry. For the purpose of our visualization, this is flat because then we could just use floors.
Yeah,
Awesome.
that's true. Yeah, and then one of the other things about topography that I mean always drives people crazy, like using um, for documentation,
Mm,
is like the whole triangulation issues that you get with
mm-hmm.
topography. Um, like if I get in that, yeah, you look at this surface, you can you can see that the only thing you can put in a topography is points.
Right.
Like you can't, and as like a landscape architect or civil engineer, like you want to be able to control where those contour lines go, and
Mm-hmm.
you get weird things. Like this is a
Right.
small
Mm-hmm.
example of it, but you get weird things, and like this where like
Oh, yeah.
this is
Okay.
where the contour line
Oh,
should
that
be
was the
going.
worst. That was the
But
worst.
yeah, like you'll drive yourself crazy trying to fix topography. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's another big reason why we generally don't treat
So
it.
so in that case, so the only way that I've really overcome, I mean, the flat part of the close notch, that's just a nightmare, right? But in the other
Mhm.
area, I guess the only way I've ever been able to overcome it is to draw points for every single contour, right? For every single height. Then you can at least control a little bit of that. I mean, is that like, for example, when you were implementing this to create site plans for the design firm, for example, would you just deal with some of those imperfections, or were you trying your hardest to remove them?
No, so in general, yeah, we wouldn't use topography for our contour lines. We would either be using model lines
Hmm.
or you'd be using like a CAD link,
Hmm.
like something that actually like has the lines that are correct.
Mm.
Because yeah, you'll drive yourself crazy and it's like pointless exercise.
So
I
you'd
mean,
manage that topography file. Let's say it is a CAD file that has polylines at all the right heights. You would just
mhm.
manage that, make a topo from it if you wanted the topo, but then use that for the graphics per se, just because it was
Right, you would use that
smooth.
for the
Yeah,
documentation
yeah.
because yeah, like it is useful to know like there are some times where you want to fix things like this.
Hmm.
And like so it is useful to know that you can go in and if you turn on your like triangulation edges, you can start to see like
Mm.
why these things happen. Like
Hmm.
basically it like all these weird topography things are just a result of like interpolation along
Hmm.
those edges. So like understanding why it's doing that is helpful if you like
Right.
really need to fix it. But
Hmm.
in general, like I I try to not want to fix it just because
Points,
it's
more
like
and more points. The more points you add, the smoother it gets. But then
it,
you're adding
yeah, but then
thousands of
you have
points.
then you have more points to manage
Right,
manually,
right.
which is just like, yeah, not great.
Real quick, Reggie actually had a question. Hey, Reggie, how's it going, man? About the, I guess this was probably in relation to the tool, to the drape tool you were just talking about. And I think it's a two-part answer, but he asked if the floors relate to the topo, or does the topo relate to the floor? And and so I think you can answer that, hopefully.
Yeah, so it can be either way
Hmm.
depending on how you want to do it. Like they're not establishing any like set relationships,
Hmm.
so you can still go in and modify the floor, and then
Hmm.
if you want the topography to follow, you just have to come back afterwards and like tell it that. And so, yeah, it can be either way depending on what you're doing. And yeah, we
You
want
would
to,
have to so I think maybe a second part of that question, which I don't think he said, but I could imagine him thinking, is when things change, you have to rerun that because there isn't an associated relationship that is
right.
maintained, I should say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Like we've thought about like when you start establishing relationships
I
like
was
that,
just
it
thinking,
becomes
no, don't do it. I don't need you don't have to go down that road. I'm thinking don't
yeah,
do it,
yeah,
but
yeah.
yes. So
Like
that's
yeah,
good to know though.
yeah. Like I people always ask that, and yeah, we've like thought about that for some of the tools. But yeah, it like quickly becomes like you have to chase like all the relationships around, and
Yeah.
yeah, it
I was
becomes
just thinking
very
I'm just imagining my mind
complex.
having something auto running and then you're moving that slab up and the topo trying to reform to it. I'm just I just that's not even worth it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Cool. All right. So that's some topo slab edge stuff. So what else we got?
Yeah, so after you kind of go floors in, kind of one of the next steps is often you'll get people wanting to model curbs. And so yeah, out of the box, one of the ways that we often do that is with railings.
Hmm.
So yeah, on the architecture tab, you can go in and you can just like sketch a railing, and if you have the right type of railing made, you can do it kind of old school out of the box, but we have kind of a quick, efficient method to do it with FOREground, um, the quick curb. And we have kind of two types that we ship out with FOREground just to make it a little bit easier for you. So I have ones that hosted to like a sidewalk or one that's hosted to a road. Basically, it's just like a 6-inch offset.
Hmm.
And then it will just start generating from edges.
Hmm.
So I can pick edges, and I checked the option where it's gonna grab the entire segment length
Hmm.
of that floor boundary, which speeds up the process
Hmm.
considerably. Uh,
So this is not a railing.
it is a railing,
It is a
so
railing,
yes,
but it's
it
using
is a
it's using
railing.
the pick line. Got it. Okay.
Yeah,
Awesome.
so I was gonna go and we'll look at this railing here for a second. But yeah, kind of one of the out of the box tricks that I've learned kind of even just like when developing this tool
Hmm.
is that railings are actually more stable if you use the non-continuous rail as opposed to like the top rail or a handrail,
Hmm.
which is like the older
Right, the
version
old
of
old
of
school
a rail.
profile. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
the old school profile is actually more stable. Like it will give you less errors and it behaves a little bit better
Hmm.
on like weird conditions, which you can get like lots of weird conditions
Right.
um,
Right.
on that. Yeah, and then the great thing about yeah curbs as railings is yeah you can modify these sub elements.
Hmm.
So you can just and it's gonna stay and
Hmm.
update whenever those things change.
Hmm. So it's
But
automatically placing a hosted rail to that floor. You're not hosting to
yeah,
topography in this case. You're hosting to the floor.
right.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's you pick the edge of the floor and it's gonna grab that floor as the host, and then yeah,
Yep.
it does a
That's
couple
awesome.
of things kind
Hmm.
of, but it's still just a railing. Like I can go in and edit the path manually too.
Hmm.
Um,
So
yep.
Emil had a question, which I think is why I asked if is it a railing. He said, could you use a slab edge for the curb?
Yeah, so slab edges don't host on slopes at all, which is like a deal breaker.
Yeah, they kind of need that, right? So yeah, and that's why I was asking. I was curious if it was just some sort of a swept profile that you're recreating, or if it was the rail. The rail is way more useful. I was curious as to
Yeah,
the
yeah,
site.
that
I believe the site
essentially,
design tool in Revit that it was trying. I think what it developed was a masked sweep or something, if memory serves me right, which was not useful.
Yeah. And I've even tried it with in place sweeps,
Hmm.
and you start to get like essentially the hardest part of a to a model of any curve is a curve that's sloped. So
Hmm.
you have a curved edge that's also sloped,
Hmm.
and like that's where like almost all out of the box Revit tools like will fall down.
Hmm.
Like if
Even
you're
the railings do
using
sometimes. I know we've had some
even the
issues.
railings do
Yeah,
sometimes.
we've had some
Yeah,
issues,
that's
and
true.
our solution was usually to segment it. To segment the curve, and when we run into, but you're talking a really wonky situation when that happens.
Right. It does happen.
Hmm.
But that's where if you're using the older rail, it's a
Hmm.
lot more stable on
Right, as
those
opposed to the
conditions.
top rail or whatnot. Cool.
Yep. Yep.
That's awesome. I was checking. There was a question about the CAD link for contours. So I guess this is all on the lines. He's asking. So who was this? Junior? No, Matthew was asking. Um, is there any topo creation tools in FOREground, or actually, I guess maybe he's asking. I'm trying to understand exactly what I was asking, but the way you create the contour does or the topo does it make a difference for FOREground? So if that topo was created using a CAD import versus making a regular topo from scratch, is there a difference? I think that's kind of what you're asking,
Yeah.
Matthew. Let me know if it's not, but I think that's what you're asking.
Yeah. No, I mean the thing is that once it's a topography is topography,
Right.
regardless of how you made it. Like it
Mm-hmm.
still only allows for unless you're like doing the BIM 360, linking a topography, which is like a different type of topography, like
Mm-hmm.
that you can't edit.
Right.
Um, but so we do have some different topography generation tools in FOREground where you can make topography from model lines.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Cool.
so you can make topography from a CSV, from a CAD, from a land XML, or even model lines. But it still is just going to generate points and make
Mm.
the topography from that points because that's just
Right.
how
Right.
topography works in Revit. Like there's nothing we can do on the back end that
Yeah.
changes
Yeah.
how topography works ultimately.
Yeah. I guess yeah with the CAD import, I guess if the only difference would be no, I guess once it makes the points, right? I was saying if you update and stuff, but points are points and topo's topo, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah,
Awesome.
we're hopeful that based on like the Revit roadmap and like that there might be some new things coming out of the dev team.
Mm-hmm.
But for now, yeah, topography is topography.
Mm-hmm.
And um yeah, we like the slab tools and like drape will work with like so the nice thing about like if you bring in a civil topography via like link topo surface, if
Mm-hmm.
people know that workflow, um, the nice thing about that workflow is that kind of that topography is a different kind of topography and
Mm-hmm.
that it maintains its shape from Civil 3D so you can export it out and then link it in but
Mm-hmm.
it like then you can't edit it like I can't mess with those it's not made of points it's made slightly differently but it becomes like a static
Mm-hmm.
object in Revit that can be updated but like you can't touch it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Awesome. So we've got our topo. We draped our slabs. We adjust our topo. We draw some curves. So we talked a little bit about out of the box and versus FOREground. So what's next for out of the box versus FOREground?
Sure, so I
We're
was
kind of
gonna get
creating this
into
dichotomy, and I like it. It's kind of cool.
no, I mean that's how we view it is
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you can, yeah. So I was gonna talk a little bit about kind of planting content because like yeah, people are always interested in how that works. Let's see,
Hmm.
is my I'm gonna flip over to 2019, and this is I noticed you shared an image of some of um, these old little tree
Yeah,
families
yeah. I was
from the
digging through it. I
blog.
wasn't sure what kind of content I wanted to show for the image, and I loved those especially the high quality looking trees look pretty sweet. So I figured I would toss those on there.
Yeah, so this is kind of the next step that we're working on at Parallax is like foreground. We'll get into it a little bit more next, but yeah, foreground get we does a lot of like planting placement tools, and
Mhm.
so we're developing a content library sort of separately that will kind of work with foreground.
Mhm.
This is like yeah, this is an old school we call it classic Lauren content that's yeah
Mhm.
very old from the blog, but it's using a lot of the principles that we're using in our content library. Essentially, I think I downloaded this because I don't even know where some of
You
this stuff
download
is
it from
anymore.
yourself. I love that. It's the best. I do that all the
Yeah,
time.
and so yeah, one of the cool things about planting content is it has these like really interesting like scalable features,
Mhm,
which can be a little bit of a headache when you're
mhm,
making content, but it has like really cool properties. So let's see if this works here. Um, so you can set up your width to be separate from your
mhm.
height, by like nesting components down. And like, yeah, this is the example that I posted, um, so that let's see.
So there are a couple of people who are complimenting those tree families, and so I will let them know, and I'll put the link to it too. That you can get them from your blog, which I think you posted them to Revit City a long time ago, right? Is that where the download link was from?
Yeah, yeah, that's because I think WordPress, it's like
You couldn't
hosting
host or something? Yeah,
content.
yeah.
Yeah, hosting content on WordPress is like a little funny. So
hmm
yeah, they were just up on Revit City.
Awesome.
Um,
So we'll
but yeah,
definitely
then
post links to all this, anything that's available for you guys, for sure, for sure.
yeah. So the Parallax content library is not on there. Sorry,
Got it.
folks.
Got it.
But
But
some of
that
this
but
old
that
stuff
tree right there
is.
is that one tree right there is online.
Yeah, there's a couple of them.
Yeah.
But you can take a look and see how it works. Basically, you have to kind of nest down, and there's like some funny things that are happening,
Mhm.
with the parameters. But yeah, the nice thing is then you can have that width, and that's often the way landscape architects work, is you want that width to be controlled separately
Mhm.
from the height of the plant,
Mhm.
so that you can. So, because sometimes you have like really narrow and tall
Right.
trees, and so it needs to be kind of all separate. And then, yeah, and then you can do that also with like in a number of different ways. So like we have that in our, um, planting families as well in like
Mhm.
elevation. So you can see you can do elevation symbols that also have like less scalable. And one of the things that we're also building in to our tree and plant library is like the ability to have an instance height, um, as opposed to like out of the box Revit planting families, it's usually just all type parameters, like the height. It's a type parameter and it's not an instance parameter. Um, the nice thing about having it as an instance parameter is then, you can have it like be adjustable in elevation like this, like on the fly, and then you could also like start to like randomize heights and have like your planting just look a little bit nicer.
Mhm.
So you'll see actually on my ribbon, we're starting to build out some of those plant tools to allow you to kind of randomize rotation, randomize like heights within a range that kind of make some of what we're doing on foreground is like kind of purely visual,
Mhm.
but also because like we know that's what like some people just like to model the landscape for the visualization purposes,
Right.
but it's also useful, um, for documentation as well.
Mhm. Mhm. No, that's awesome. They look great. So I'm looking at the elevation in the 3D view, and then when you clicked it, I'm seeing this low poly Christmas tree. Can you explain in the family browser up there? So is there a
Hmm?
3D object or something that's representing it? So click one of those.
One of
I don't know
these
if anyone
guys.
picked up on it. Yeah. So see the little family.
Oh yeah, this guy.
So
Yeah.
is this are these how is this content? This is the parallax content that you're looking at?
This is kind of like a test file that
Okay.
has a couple different types built into it.
hmm
Um, But yeah, essentially what happens with this low poly guy is it's taking, I think it's pulling, maybe it's even pulling from this first type.
hmm
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not
Okay.
someone else
I'm
who
looking
knows
at it
more
like
about the
like why are
properties.
we seeing this cool little Christmas tree, but we're seeing all. So I thought maybe you were doing something funky with the symbolic views versus whatnot, but it's just the
Well,
that's
yeah,
just the thumbnail. That's
that's just the thumbnail that's generating. You can see like, so we're building it in so that you can swap out,
there yeah
different
a
like
solid.
3D types.
hmm
Yeah, so you can see that's what's that one. Maybe that's
hmm
people who know more about the properties palette could maybe tell you that maybe because that's the first type,
The
that's
thumbnail
like
it's
the
making. Yeah,
preview.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so we have like a lot of different nested types in here, and you can see, yeah, we have the plan symbol, we have the elevation symbol, we have like the
hmm
3D model, which is a solid in this one, or it can be RPC, or it can be a custom geometry. And then yeah, we've got the root ball.
That's awesome.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and
I
there
think
was a
that.
couple questions on that, and that's why I was bringing it up too and focusing on it a little bit. Is I think people were interested in how it looked in elevation, which you showed them, but what you just showed there by clicking it and showing how you're using symbolic representations to view all those different things, I think is something people can learn from that. If you want to have a specific, even if it's a lower quality, just like you showed there, or like even just like a round sort of ball, like a push pin
Mhm.
tree or something like that, you can have
Yep.
that, but then you can also have all these higher detailed views for different things, which is pretty neat. But by building in these detail items or message families, however you want to do it, really.
Mhm. Mhm. Yep.
Awesome, awesome. So I think that was the question. I just want to make sure I didn't miss that. Yeah, yeah. So cool. So one of the things, I guess then, which I see on foreground and I'm interested in as far as previous versus now versus foreground is the placement in those planting placement tools.
Mhm.
So I don't know, maybe talk a little bit about how you did it before foreground, and then maybe show some of the cool foreground tools for that, because I'd love to hear some of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So out of the box, Revit is like really good at like kind of some baseline planting stuff, like automatically generates schedules,
Hmm.
like it does some of the base Revit stuff, but placing plants, like if you're trying to like fill an area,
Hmm.
is like something I generally like would avoid doing
Hmm.
before foreground. Like
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not sure I would
Well,
generally
I guess
recommend
the one
it.
good thing site components and plantings do is they do follow the topography, which is nice, right? They sort of host to it. But yes, that's why I
Right.
was curious. The sort of creation of large planting plans must have been interesting to approach
Right.
without any automated
So
tools.
yeah, so when I have, so previously, yeah, when I would use areas, I would either use like rooms or areas. So
Mm,
these are actually rooms specifically,
okay.
but like rooms and areas are very, very similar
Hmm.
in Revit.
Hmm.
Um, and essentially, like then you can have the area, you can use that area to like calculate the number of plants.
Hmm.
And now with like calculated values and tags, like you can even tag and schedule
Hmm.
those things. Like when
Okay.
I was first doing this stuff, like that was like before like it was even in schedules
Hmm.
or if it was only in schedules and not in tags, I don't remember, but
You're
it
right,
was
right.
like
Yep.
it was a little bit more cobbled together than it even is now.
Hmm.
um, and so it would just be kind of like pulling that from the area itself and then not necessarily placing individual plants.
Ah,
But
I
yeah, the
see.
nice
I
thing
see.
about foreground is it does allow you to place, so I have a few areas up here where I've already placed some mixes. It does allow you to place those plants. And then, yeah, we have like tagging and updating tools so that when things change, you can kind of update them all together.
Hmm.
So I
Are
can
you
go
still
ahead and
using rooms to generate that? Is that why you have this file here, or
so so yeah, you can use
different
so we
objects?
use areas. Yeah, so you can
Hmm.
use rooms, areas, or floors.
Got it.
Essentially, it needs to be kind of like a bounded area.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and so that's what we're limiting it to.
Awesome.
So you can also do floors,
Hmm.
but
Yeah, which is pretty
but
cool because I guess with floors you could make a similar type of plan you're showing here, and even have different floor types with different graphics if you wanted, right? And then or whatever, or shaded or hatches or something like that, and then you could also generate the actual plans on top of it. So that's pretty neat, and you can make it contour to the topo, right?
yeah, you could. The thing about floors that makes it like if you're doing an area like a planting plan like this, where you have
Mm,
a lot of shapes that are like sharing boundaries, is like you have to start like if these were all different floors, they'd
mm,
have to be like you'd have to like go in and edit the boundary and come back
mm,
out, and then if they share boundaries when they change. So the nice thing about that is like you can just kind of like drag these guys around, and
mm.
then you don't have to like they'll just
Right,
kind of
right. It's
update.
it's affecting both instead of affecting one or the other, and you won't get
Right.
a these floors share or overlapping floors error every time you change them.
Yeah. Exactly.
Awesome.
So that's kind of, I started out using the areas and I use rooms now, but they're very similar in a lot
Hmm.
of ways. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I wonder what the big drawback would be between either or. I mean, is there a reason why you jumped to rooms from areas?
so areas are limited to like an area plan, which is one of the, like it's a big,
Hmm.
one of the bigger drawbacks. So
Hmm.
like you can only see them in an area plan. So if you
Right.
wanted to see them in any other of like your site plan view, like your
Hmm.
floor plan views, you wouldn't be able
Hmm.
to. That's a little bit of a downside. Um, the other and that kind of comes with like some documentation downsides, like because area plans, you can't do view references with area plans,
Hmm.
like which is like a strange limitation.
Yeah. Yep.
But So, like, so that's just like a few things with area plans. That's just like why? It's because like they're different. Like they're not real plans almost the way Revit treats them.
Right.
They're like
Yeah, they're like
so
these separate things sitting on top of everything else. Yeah, yeah. So I can see that. I
yeah.
guess my only thought was when
I
if
understand that the idea of a room is like really weird
no, it's
to an
weird, but
architect.
it's weird, but it's also cool. I mean, I'm all for different uses. I'm curious as to if you're linking in architecture models, if you have any issues with bounding and that kind of stuff by using rooms. Like like you said, the area is nice because it's kind of like its own thing. But is there
Yeah.
issues with links and bringing in room bounding objects through links? Have you know?
I mean, I've never had any issue. I mean, you want to make sure like in your schedules you're not like pulling in
Mhm.
linked things, but in general you don't want to do that anyway.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, no, I've never had an issue. Like usually like a link like I don't think you can even room bound through a link anyways.
hmm,
So
hmm.
like it becomes less of an issue.
Scoured X, who's a regular viewer of the show. What's up, man? Um, or woman. Actually, I don't even know if you're a man or woman. I'm sorry. You're just a username on YouTube. I thought. Anyways, asked about any chance to add roof to any of these selections instead of floors. So it seems like
Yeah.
it seems like you're using even just for the out of the box stuff. You're using floors for a lot of this. Is there a reason you chose floors over roofs? Because I guess in theory they
Yeah,
kind
so
of
so
can
the
have the same
slab
similarities.
slab editing tools actually do support roofs and floors both.
Mm-hmm.
For plants, we are limit yeah, like one of plants actually can't host to a roof.
Mm.
Um, and so that's why we don't have roofs enabled as like as a
Mm-hmm.
plant area element. Like feasibly we could, but like it creates this like weird thing. If you're up on a roof, like those plants actually can't host to that element.
Mm.
So you better just use a freaking floor instead.
I didn't ask this question, but now that you're mentioning it, I'm sort of thinking about the nice thing about the roof object is that it goes from the base up, right? Which could be helpful when you're sitting on top of your host, right? As opposed to going from the top down as far as the way it's hosted. I mean, obviously you don't necessarily have to worry about it too much if the add-in's doing the work, but just something that I was thinking about now is so if you change the
Yeah,
thickness of stuff, it would grow this way instead of into your topo, which is kind of nice, I guess.
right. Yeah, and so we had originally planned for for the plant tools to support roofs.
Hmm.
But when I was doing some testing, I was like, oh, a plant can actually host to like to a roof. So if you go to pick new
Right.
host, it does say, yeah, pick a floor surface or level. Like that's what plants are limited to
Interesting.
as far as a host is concerned.
Hmm.
So so I
Interesting.
can go ahead and show the planting tools a
Sure.
little bit in action. It's a little bit more interesting than just watching.
Emil just mentioned green roof. Good point. I guess you have to put a floor up there if you want the host to those. If you want the host, or you host to the
Yeah,
level, or you host to the level.
yeah, or you
But
host a level, but if it's like shape edited,
right.
suddenly that doesn't work.
Yeah.
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 So yeah, the way yeah, our placement tools work is I'm not going to get into mixes just because we're a little short on time, but essentially you can build mixes from planting components in the
Hmm.
model. So I have a few mixes that I have already kind of built out. And then you can select multiple areas, you can select single areas. We'll go ahead and just grab a few of these, and then it starts to preview like the points
Mm-hmm.
based off that. And then the default is triangular. It can be a grid spacing,
Hmm.
and then you can see it grabs the host, and then I can run it, and then it's gonna place and fill the plants in that area.
Nice.
And you can see this is a mix of like three different types.
Hmm.
And then yeah, and the big part is like the updating. Like you said, like it's easy often to like make something initially, but it's the
Hmm.
updating later that becomes like a pain in the butt.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, like we're essentially managing a little bit of a database here. So like whenever you place
Hmm.
a plant like area, like we're keeping track of it so that if it changes, it'll update when you hit update all
Hmm. Hmm.
um,
And that
with
is
the
that
area.
update per session, or is that always managing it? So if you made all these changes, saved, closed Revit, and reopen, and then update, is it still working?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep. And so it's keeping
I was just curious. I'm thinking of workflow and
right. Yeah.
curious with
No, it's
how that
not
works.
it's not in the session. It's
Awesome.
basically it's saving to an element,
Hmm.
and then we can like retrieve and check that element to see if it's changed, even if
Awesome.
I closed down and reopened it.
So
So that's
one
fill
thing,
area.
yeah, one
Oh,
thing
go
I
ahead.
think maybe to make sure we cover in time because I think it's going to be something that people are interested in, and I'm interested in how you've approached it before and after or whatnot. Is site walls. So retaining
Mm,
walls, that kind of stuff. I'm
mhm.
curious to hear, and I know that I've had that question a few times, so I'm curious to hear sort of your original approach to site walls that maybe follow landscape or retaining walls that retain landscape, that kind of stuff. How you approach that, and is there any have you learned something new over the years or developed a tool over the years that makes that easier?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two different ways you can go with
Mm-hmm.
that. Like you can use actual Revit walls,
Mm-hmm.
which can be great if you have like a more complex wall and you like want to show different materials and thicknesses, and if you have like a, but yeah, where that starts to fall apart is if you're following topography
Right.
and
For sure.
it's curved and it's sloped and
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And so I've found in those instances where I'll use a floor to model like a wall.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So like a
like
three
if
foot deep floor for a 3 foot tall wall type of deal.
right, yeah. So I could let's see, we should be able to do this on the fly here. Let's see if I think I have a type in here. Yeah, this one's a 2 foot deep one.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, if I have a wall here, the downside is yeah, then you have to kind of like trace it out
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and plan. But then the upside tends to be that you have those points. Like
Mm-hmm.
we tend to want to control our walls with like points more like how you edit floors and
Right.
like a wall profile is just like
Mm-hmm.
ugh. Like I don't I don't want to edit a wall profile if
Right.
I'm
Right.
doing like site walls. That's just like a pain in the butt. So then I can use drape slab. Yeah, it's warning me that it needs to have a 3D view. It should still work. And then maybe I'll just do my boundary points. And I'm gonna go ahead and do that 2 foot offset. We'll run it. Yeah, and you'll see that it's a floor, but
Mm-hmm. But you have the points.
yeah, but you can use drape slab with it
Mm-hmm.
just the
Mm-hmm.
same as with anything else. And so yeah, now it's essentially following that topography with the minimum possible points, which usually minimum is just easier to manage.
Mm-hmm.
But you can add
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
points
That's
if you
great.
need it to like do stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's an interesting word. Yeah. I've the way I've approached it in the past has been the railing, which I think I showed in one of the previous episodes.
Mm.
But to what you mentioned before with curbs is that you have a little less control over how when it gets a little wonky how that looks. And here is kind of nice because I guess you could use the points now to sort of modify that at the really wonky site areas and make it a more smooth
Right.
transition.
Yeah, or if you wanted it to like do all sorts of crazy stuff, like here, you wanted this to be up, you could drag that guy.
Mm-hmm.
You would need a deeper wall, but yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you can start to like sculpt your wall, which is
Mm-hmm.
how landscape architects typically work with walls.
Mm-hmm. And so
Yeah.
then what about if it's retaining and you have a high side of topo and a low side of topo on each side of the wall? Are you just
Mm.
still rocking that with points like anyone else would, or is there any? Have you found any easier way than dealing with 1,000 points next to each other that have a 3 foot difference or
Yeah.
whatever?
I mean, that's where I tend to not use topography.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it depends on the site. Like if you're out here in the site, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
topography might be the best way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but typically, yeah, we're working on a landscape, and this is gonna it
Yeah.
probably is gonna be end up being a floor over
Yeah,
here
I
in a
get. Yeah,
lot of
my question is
cases.
more along the lines of please tell me you found an easier way to do it, but it doesn't sound like you have. So here we are.
Yeah.
Someone had a question. Radau, it looks like you joined late, and I don't think we mentioned it. Is there any tagging enhancements for planting with the foreground tool, or just I guess in general, I guess any tips for when you're actually doing tagging here?
Yeah. Yes, that's yeah, you'll see up here we have Um, so maybe I'll do a couple other things so we can see all the
Sure.
tags happen a little faster. So
Yeah.
yeah, you can do place along, which will place plants along lines.
Mhm.
I'll go ahead and show off the manual group. Um, which also, so if you're placing plants individually, which often with trees, we are placing those individually, you can come back kind of afterwards
Mhm.
and establish like a grouping for those guys. Uh, and what it's going to do is it's going to let you add connector lines if you want.
Mm.
And then you can also tag it on the fly. I'll go ahead and not tag it yet. And then again, it has the updating capabilities. So like if
Mhm.
that guy moves, this one gets deleted and this one moves. And I can run that update all. And
Mm.
it's gonna replace those lines. And then I can do a tag all also, which will sit there and it'll basically it finds all the groupings of the plants that we've
Mm.
established, and then it's gonna tag them all. So it's
Oh,
gonna tag.
nice. By
So you can
grouping,
see,
which is neat, right? Is that
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So it's gonna tag each type within the grouping. So this one has three different types, so it tags each one. It's gonna tag all the ones up here also. Um, yeah, so yeah, you can do a tag all, or you can like tag individually as well. And then it's going to automatically generate these, and then you can move them from there. And then there's a little bit of stuff happening, so it should kind of remember. So if I move this guy, let's see which one. If I move like this one down here,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's moving like some shared parameters around. Like that's how it's getting that number.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I like change the shape of this and do another update all, it's gonna it's going to try to keep those tags in the same place
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
effectively. So every
Awesome.
time you run an update on like the ones that have been placed automatically, it's actually going to replace all of those
Mm-hmm.
um, because yeah, if the shape has changed, it needs to replace them effectively, and so then it has to like retag them all. But there's some stuff happening so that we kind of keep track of where this stuff is, so it looks like it doesn't kind of move on you. If that
Nice.
makes
No,
sense.
that's awesome. That's seems like something that'd be super useful to anyone who has to do that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Great. Well, I think we're running up against it. Is there anything that you really wanted to show that you didn't get time to show?
I think the planting, we finished with planting. That's
Awesome.
kind of what I was
That's
hoping to.
great. No, that was fantastic. There were some awesome little tips and tools in there, as well as the introduction to FOREground. And so I will put links in the description here on YouTube as well as in the blog post to how you guys can get all of this stuff. FOREground is a Parallax tool app. I can put a link to that. I'll put a link to Lauren to your blog, Land Arc BIM, as well as I assume your Twitter handle as well. Is there any final words for the BIM After Dark audience that or how would they best contact you if they wanted to? Would it be on Twitter?
Uh, yeah, Twitter is fine. Yeah, we have a contact form on the Parallax Team website. You
Awesome.
could post a link to that.
Sweet.
Yeah, there's lots of ways we can get in touch. But yeah, we're all very active on Twitter, so you can reach out to any of us on Twitter
Awesome.
as well.
Well, Lauren, thank you so much for joining today. I really appreciate it. This was great. I think it's awesome. I can definitely see some use out of many of these foreground tools, but also the discussion was valuable, and I think everyone else seemed to enjoy it too. So thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. All right. And everyone else, thank you for joining us today on episode. Actually, this was episode 60. I didn't even realize this was 60, which is pretty awesome. So thank you guys for joining me today. If you're interested on seeing all the other previous 59 episodes, head on over to live.bimafterdark.com. Don't forget to check out polycam.bimafterdark.com or roll back and use that QR code and thank them for sponsoring this episode. You guys are amazing. Have a great week. And I'll talk to you guys soon.